Your kid asked you for $20 last week, and instead of just handing it over, you sat them down and explained what $20 actually means, how long it takes to earn, what it could become if they saved it, how your light bill used to be a guessing game every month because nobody in your house growing up ever said the word budget out loud. And your kid just sat there like, so can I get the 20 or not? My name's Franklin. I've been watching Black Gen X parents move for a while now, and y'all are doing something your parents never did. You're explaining yourselves. You're giving your kids the why behind the no, and you probably don't even realize how new that is in your family. But there's a reason you parent the way you do, and it's got everything to do with the house you grew up in and the things that house never said out loud. Let's start with the money, because this is where it gets interesting. A recent Intuit survey found that 78% of Black parents said their own financial stress made them realize they needed to teach their kids how to handle money. 78%. That means almost 8 out of 10 Black parents looked at their own situation and said, my kid is not going to figure this out the hard way like I did. But here's what's real about that. About a third of those same parents said they didn't even know how to teach it because nobody taught them. You grew up in a house where money was a private thing. You knew when it was tight because the meals changed. You knew when it was good because somebody came home with bags. But nobody sat you down and said, this is a checking account. This is how interest works. This is what happens when you only pay the minimum on a credit card. So now you're out here Googling how to teach your kid about investing at 11 o'clock at night, opening custodial accounts, showing your 13-year-old what a credit score is. And your parents are looking at you sideways like, why are you telling that child all your business? Because that's how it was. Money was grown folks' business. If you asked how much something cost, you got more than you got. If you asked why y'all couldn't get something, you got because, and you didn't ask again. But you remember what that felt like, not knowing, moving and not knowing why, lights going off and nobody explaining what happened, just go play outside. And you decided, maybe not even consciously, that your kid was going to understand how the house runs, not to scare them, to prepare them. That's not something you read in a parenting book. That came from a gap you felt your whole childhood that you couldn't even name until you were grown. Now, let's zoom out, because the money thing is just one piece. You explained everything, and that is a complete departure from the house you came from. Your parents operated on a simple system. I said it, you do it. End of discussion. Because I said so wasn't a cop-out to them. It was the whole philosophy. Obedience was the goal. Understanding was optional. And look, there was a logic to that. When your parents were coming up, the margin for error was thin. A Black kid questioning the wrong adult, hesitating at the wrong moment, being in the wrong place with the wrong attitude, the consequences could be real and permanent. Speed of obedience wasn't about control for the sake of it. It was about keeping you in one piece. But here's what got lost in that. You never learned how to reason through a decision. You learned how to follow instructions. And when the instructions stopped, when you hit 18 and nobody was telling you what to do anymore, a lot of people just froze or made the same mistakes their parents made because they knew the rules but not the thinking behind the rules. So now you're the parent who says, don't touch that, and here's why. You're the parent who gives your kid a reason instead of a look. You're the parent who, when your kid asks, but why can't I, you actually answer, even when it's exhausting, even when because I said so is sitting right there on your tongue, ready to go. And yeah, sometimes you hear yourself explaining something to a 6-year-old for the 4th time, and you think, my mama would have ended this conversation 20 minutes ago. But you keep going because you remember being that kid who wanted to know why and got shut down every time. And you know what that did to your curiosity, to your confidence, to the way you moved through the world for years, second-guessing yourself because you were trained to follow, not to think. Now, I want to talk about something a lot of you are doing that feels small, but is actually massive. You say, my bad to your kids. Not just for stepping on their foot, for real things, for losing your temper, for being too harsh, for saying something you didn't mean when you were stressed. You know how wild that is? In your parents' house, An apology from an adult to a child would have been like seeing a unicorn in the driveway. It just didn't happen. Adults were right, period. Even when they were wrong, they were right. And if you pointed out that they were wrong, now you were wrong for pointing it out. That created something. It created adults who don't know how to own a mistake without feeling like their whole identity is under attack. Adults who get defensive before the sentence is even finished. Adults who confuse accountability with weakness. And you saw that play out in your relationships, in your friendships, in the way arguments went sideways over nothing because nobody knew how to just say, I was wrong. So you started doing it with your kids, awkwardly at first, because your body resists it. Something in you says, you're the parent. You don't owe them an explanation, but you push through that. You sit your kid down and say, the way I talked to you earlier, that wasn't cool, and I'm sorry. And your kid looks at you different after that, not with less respect, with more, because you just showed them that being strong and being honest can live in the same person. That's not a small thing. That's a whole rewiring of how your family operates, and you did it with no model to follow. There's a phrase that floated around black households for decades. What you got to be depressed about? That one sentence shut down more conversations than any locked door ever could. It told you that your internal life was not worth discussing, that if you had food, clothes, and a roof, anything else you were feeling was extra, unnecessary, ungrateful even. And it wasn't just depression. Any big feeling was suspect. You were too sensitive. You were doing too much. You were being dramatic. Fix your face was emotional regulation in a lot of homes, not tell me what's wrong. Fix your face. Now, among Americans who actually go to therapy, 2025 data from Growth Therapy shows that millennials make up about 48%. Gen Z is at almost 32%, and Gen X, 14.5%. The generation doing the most emotional heavy lifting in their families right now is barely showing up in the therapist chair. That's not because you don't need it. It's because you were raised to believe needing it was the problem. But your kids, you're raising them different. You're asking them how they feel. You're using words like anxious and overwhelmed with a 10-year-old because you know that if they learn the vocabulary now, they won't spend 30 years not being able to name what's happening in their own chest. Somebody wrote something online that stuck with a lot of people. They said, we didn't turn out fine. We turned out functional. And that's real. You can hold down a job and still be running from yourself. You can raise a family and still not know how to sit with your own sadness. Functional and healed are two different zip codes. And most of y'all just realize you've been living in one while telling everybody else you're in the other. Now this one's going to be a little spicy, but it needs to be said. Black Gen X is getting called the worst grandparents. And honestly, most of you heard that and shrugged. Because here's the truth. A lot of you were babysitting other people's kids when you were 8, running the house by 12, making adult decisions with no adult guidance. You grew up fast because nobody gave you a choice. And now that your kids are grown and having their own kids, some of them expect you to do it all over again. And you said no. Not, no, I don't love my grandbabies. Just, no. I'm not raising another set of kids. I love them. I'll spoil them. I'll be there for the moments that matter. But I am not about to hand over my Saturdays, my retirement, my peace to repeat a cycle that took my childhood the first time around. And people got in their feelings about it because in a lot of families, grandparents stepping in was the default. That was the unspoken contract. But Gen X read the contract and said, I didn't sign this. That's not selfishness. That's the first time a generation of black people said, I'm allowed to have a life that doesn't revolve around everybody else's needs. And whether people agree with it or not, that boundary didn't come from nowhere. It came from a childhood where you had no boundaries at all. So let's add it up. Because when you look at it all together, what Black Gen X parents did is kind of remarkable. You took a financial system that was hidden from you and made it visible for your kids. You took a communication style that was built on silence and replaced it with conversation. You took an emotional culture that punished feelings and turned it into a home where feelings get named. You took a discipline model based on fear and traded it for one based on understanding. And you did all of this without a blueprint, without your parents co-signing it, without a generation ahead of you saying, here's how you do it different. You just did it because something in you said, this part stops here. Not all of it is perfect. Some of you over-explain because you're overcorrecting. Some of you are so focused on being different from your parents that you forgot to keep the parts that actually worked. Some of you are so busy healing your inner child that you forgot the outer adult still needs attention too. But the direction is right. The intention is right. And your kids, even when they don't say it, they see it. You're not the generation that had it figured out. You're the generation that said, figure it out isn't good enough anymore. And that right there is the whole legacy. Franklin's watching, and from where I sit, y'all are doing better than you think. Hit the like and subscribe button if you found this video interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.